that doesn't matter, does it?
Okay, do you have a notification?
There's these buttons up there. I don't know what they say, what they mean.
Okay, do you have a thing that says Youri is recording?
Oh, yes. Okay, I see it. It's up in the upper left-hand corner.
Okay, perfect. Okay, that means we are live. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. Our guest, our very important guest today, is a former U.S. Marine, an independent journalist that you can find at Dissident Voice and Counterpunch. He is a member of Veterans for Peace, the East Bay Chapter 162. His name is Daniel Borgstrom. Daniel, welcome to 1+1.
Hello, Youri.
And
I feel welcomed.
You are very welcomed. And we're going to talk to Daniel about a very important campaign that he's involved with, which regards Pacifica Radio. So Daniel, but before we get into the campaign you're involved in, first of all, for people who don't know Pacifica Radio, tell us about Pacifica Radio and its important influence on the left in the United States.
Okay. Pacifica Radio, that was at the time, that was just one station, KPFA. It went on the air in 1949. It was started by a person named Lou Hill. He was a conscientious objector who refused to fight in World War II. And of course, although I would have thought, well, maybe I'd be too scared, I'd go hide under the bed or something, but theoretically I would have supported World War II. But I still respect people, courageous people like Lou Hill, who stood up for their pacifistic beliefs. He refused to fight, and he wanted a radio station that was going to be anti-war. And this started in 1949. Then they went through that was the Korean War, of course. It started about then. And then there was the Mccarthy Era. McCarthy gets all the credit for it, but it was a lot of people. It wasn't just McCarthy. Mm-hmm. But Pacifica Radio, KPFA, stood up to that, stood up against it, spoke out against it, and got away with it, stayed around. And then came the war in Vietnam. Again, KPFA was anti-war. And at the same time, Pacifica added these other stations. There's 5 stations now. There's ours in Northern California, the Bay Area, we call it, San Francisco Bay Area. The station itself is located in Berkeley, about a 20-minute walk from where I live. And then there's one in Los Angeles, one in New York, that's WBAI. There's one in D.C., and there's one in Texas. Let's see. Going from there, the idea is we want to continue to be an anti-war station. Now, there's also a bunch of people around who do not want an anti-war station. We do in this country have an organization called the CIA.
Yes, I believe they're professional liars and professional killers, right?
Yes, and professional saboteurs. You've probably heard of Operation Mockingbird started up in 47, 48.
I'm familiar with Operation Mockingbird, but for people who don't know Operation Mockingbird, do tell briefly what it was.
Yes, the CIA established relations with at least 25 major U.S. news outlets. That's television networks, newspapers. That includes the New York Times, especially the New York Times, especially the Washington Post, which they all get a lot of credit for being the paper of record and for being truth-telling watchdogs. They willingly did passed on disinformation from the CIA, all of them. And for a good story on that, I recommend reading what's his name, Bernstein's article, the CIA and the media, something like that.
Would that be Carl Bernstein, who helped?
Bernstein,
who famously exposed Watergate.
Of Watergate fame. He wrote that article, and it's very good. He doesn't mention. He didn't mention his own the paper he worked for, the Washington Post, but that's also involved in that. An excellent book on that is by Deborah Davis, Catherine the Great.
Okay.
Catherine being Catherine, can't think of her last name, the person who owned the newspaper, not the rest. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, there's the CIA, there's the intelligence agencies, and there's the Democratic Party, and they all kind of worked somehow together, and they've been trying to take over the station. The Democratic Party, or their minions or their agents, and this happened in the 1990s. You can call it the slow motion hijacking of Pacifica. It started out about 1992, and then there was a major rebellion against this that happened in 1999. That's very famous. I actually didn't take part in that, but it's. Excuse me, man. I got a cough.
No problem. No problem.
And the result of that was that the old regime, not the whole old regime, but the people, the monarch got thrown out. The people at the top. They kept, now the people at the lower levels, I wrote an essay one time, an allegory. The lords and ladies at versus the peasants at KPFA, KPFA Pacifica. And basically, we are the peasants. And I kind of compared it to the French Revolution. The whole thing started with a fight against the monarch, a split within the elite ruling class.
Yeah.
The people running the station. And just about everybody was against Mary Frances Berry, I believe her name was. She was the evil one. Everybody hated her. And they drove her out. Well, once they drove her out, that left an opening for us, for the people at the bottom, the sans-culottes, what'd you call them? The peasants, the riffraff, the rabble.
Rabble-rousers.
Yeah, rabble-rousers and rabble. These people have been fighting for ages to make this into a radio democracy, where people running the station would be elected. That is, you donate $25 a year, you become a member, and then you get to vote. This is a radio democracy.
Like a people's stockholder.
It's something like that. And now, I got to be the first, and all of us will admit that this has not worked smoothly. It's been very difficult. And just in one word, the reason why it's been so difficult, it's like in the French Revolution, you have all those elite nobility people still around. A lot of the proteges of the old regime, the bureaucrats, the everything, the flunkies, the all of them, they're still there.
Yeah.
And in fact, many of them are still there to this day, even though that was 20 years ago now.
And they don't want Pacifica to be what it was supposed to be founded on, which is a radio, which is a voice for social justice at home and anti-imperialism abroad.
Basically, put this way, they want anti-war light. They want anti-imperialism light. If you tune into KPFA nowadays, you'll hear all sorts of guests. You'll hear them talk about. They'll be promoting Russiagate. They'll be promoting. They'll be telling you how awful Syria is. Those awful Russians. Those awful that awful dictator in Syria. And they'll be talking about humanitarian intervention. The idea being that the U.S. Marine Corps could go in and settle all these problems. And now, theoretically, that sounds nice. This responsibility to protect. But in nearly every case where the U.S. has intervened, the result has been something worse than what was before. Iraq being a very awful example of this. You could just go on and on with examples. Libya, endless examples.
Yeah.
So now these people are aligned with, I wouldn't say, maybe I should say, lean towards the Democratic Party. Democratic Party liberals, and I don't know if you call them liberals. A sensible liberal today is a nearly extinct species.
Yeah, not the Democratic Party like the George McGoverns or the Mike Gravells or the Dennis Kuciniches of the world. More of the Democrats who, like you said, are selectively anti-war.
I think that they would. I think they would support Dennis Kucinich. I think they would go along with Bernie Sanders, but they're kind of on the edge. They're still ready to, promote the CIA and the FBI. Are basically defending us, basically our friends. That's what they will say, that we need them. They don't now, but here now I gotta qualify this by saying that some of our programs are really, really good. So even today, we have good programs. We have Project Censored. On. We have Dennis Bernstein. He's very good.
Flashpoints often invites on people like John Pilger.
Right. But now you listen to the weekday news in the morning, and what you'll get is rip and read off the corporate press. It's just... a lot of what you get is the same stuff you get on the corporate media. Now, in this country, or another example, we have third parties in this country. These third parties, the Green Party, the Peace and Freedom Party, and there's several socialist parties, very small, but they have something to say worth listening to. They don't get much decent coverage. They don't get much coverage. One example I can give you. Now, here we have, in East Bay, we have a Democrat who's basically one of the better Democrats, Barbara Lee. She's often good. I'd say often good. But anyway, we had a Green Party person running against her. Now, this is a safe district, by the way. She always gets about 80% of the vote. But this other person, this Green Party person, I think her name was Laura Wells, ran against her and got about 12% of the vote. I think it was 12. Now, that's pretty impressive in this area.
But Pacifica doesn't cover her campaign.
Right, they did not. They did not cover the campaign. They did not say anything about that she'd gotten 12%. That's excuse me.
Yeah.
That's news. They didn't cover this. So this is the direction that the Pacifica, or that the KPFA has been going, and they have tried to take over. Separate. They want to separate KPFA from Pacifica and run it themselves. And we have a big fight here. Now there are some of us. I'm affiliated with a group called Rescue Pacifica. And I believe the other day you tuned in and watched our online Zoom meeting, which we held.
Yes.
And we have about 8 members on the board, that is. The board consists of 24 members. Anyway, so now there's a number of events that have happened in the last, within the last 12 months, they've been, ever since this radio democracy came in, they have hated it. They have, from day one, they were saying this is an awful thing. And as I said, got to say again, there's problems with it.
Yeah.
It doesn't always go smoothly. More often, it does not go smoothly. Now, last fall, they were going to grab a station. There was actually a coup. A minority faction they included their program, their executive director of Pacifica, and several others of the national board went and grabbed. They literally hijacked WBAI. That's our station in New York. They took their programming off the air. They put in other programming, including music, some pretty bad music, actually. Mm-hmm. And they were, I won't go into the details of why they did this. There were problems with WBAI, but they certainly weren't going to fix them. And they held that station for about a month and finally got it returned. Finally. And while they were doing that, they were doing one more thing. They put through a voting thing to change the bylaws. Under the new bylaws, they would have, their group, it would have been a top-down, kind of a bit of a democracy. There would have been some elected posts, but the way it would have worked was it would have been that top-down system. So they forced that election on us. They took it to court, and my God, the judge went along with that.
Wow!
It was an awful thing. But anyway, so what are we going to do now? They assumed, of course, that they could win. And what happened was they lost by a landslide. 2/3 said no. No. 2/3 said no. And I think everybody, of course, there's no polling. There's no way of really telling just which way the wind is blowing. It's not like a presidential election where they have polls and all that. You just kind of know what the people that you know are going to say. And anyway, we voted again. And my group, the group I'm in, Rescue Pacifica, we were in the fight against this. So, and right now, and as I said, we have 8 seats on this board, total of 24. Mm-hmm. And we do feel, despite being kind of small, we still do feel kind of powerful because of this, the way that this came out. I mean, we have allies at the other stations. and we worked together with them. So we felt we had to hold this meeting. We're required to have a meeting every 2 months, and those people did not want to hold a meeting. They said the reason was because of COVID-19. Well, okay. Well, we know what you can get on the air and use Zoom. That's what we did.
Exactly.
And they refused to attend, of course. They boycotted it. One of their members did attend. But, well, you saw the meeting. I'm working on writing up a report about it now. I was acting secretary for the meeting. Took notes. But
what your campaign is trying to do is trying to save Pacifica from becoming yet another controlled opposition outlet beholden to the rival oligarchs of the Democratic Party and their allies in, as you mentioned, the CIA and the State Department.
Absolutely. And my thing personally, I'm especially heavy on anti-war. Of course, I'm a socialist. Mm-hmm. That's part of it. But anti-war is also an important part. Now, I was 4 years in the Marine Corps, during which time I believed all that stuff. But
Which war? Which conflict?
That was Vietnam.
Okay.
And later, I was part of the anti-war movement. We had a veterans group in there were veterans in the anti-war movement. We did various things. We took over, actually occupied the South Vietnamese consulate in San Francisco. The South Vietnamese consulate, that's the puppet regime's consulate. We did that, and they arrested us, put us on trial, and the trial lasted 4 weeks. That was in 1971 and 72. And at the end of a 4-week trial, we were acquitted. Now, I'll say that they had all the evidence in the world to show that we actually did what they said we did. And in fact, we told them we did what they said we did. The foreman of the jury was a former a retired naval officer.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see that as veterans, we did have some prestige, Now the media, they would not even cover this trial.
I was just about to ask, because there's a myth that the media was always very adversarial when it came to the Vietnam War, but that's not true. There was a popular, broad anti-war movement, the biggest anti-war movement since the resistance to the First World War. But it was more or less kind of like the underground press, the Ramparts of the world, I.F. Stone's Weekly, and yours truly, Pacifica, which gave a voice and a bloodline to the anti-war movement and much of the social justice movement at the time, right?
Exactly. And I should also add that there were many, many underground papers. The technology of the time was such that you could actually make a newspaper. You could make a paste up, I forget what they call it, paste up, but you take your articles, glue them to a sheet of paper along with your photos, and send them to a printer and print out. I used to write for those. Now I write for websites. But back then I did write for these. I wrote about this. And another thing I should say is that the media made a big thing of, the veteran, you guys support our troops. And they'd say, ask a GI what they think of this war. They'll tell you they're all for it, blah, blah, blah. The idea is, you can imagine what the idea is that GIs, you'd ask for a GI, they're going to say, yeah, we're fighting for freedom, blah, blah, blah. Well, we looked at that. Hey, these people have made us spokesmen. Ask a GI. Yeah, ask a GI. We'll tell you. We will tell you what we think of this. And let me say in retrospect, now, 30, 40 years, 40 years later, 50 years later, whatever. Now, I was not in Vietnam myself. I was nearly in the invasion, the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba, which did not happen. I mean, the U.S. involved. I would have been. I thought our unit was going to go. Fortunately, Kennedy, he was a Democrat, but I like him. He said no. And anyway, I know quite a few veterans, and these, of the people I know, about 4 or 5 died before their time. That's here stateside, not in Vietnam. These are people, one person actually died in front of me. He committed suicide. This was in, he came back from Nam, and he killed himself. I have an article. I wrote his story. It's on my website. Death of Sergeant Vandale Todd, 101st Airborne. Others have died in their 30s, some in their 50s. This is a society where you expect to live into your 70s. As I say, I'm 78 now. This is kind of normal. But these people were dying. 4 or 5 of these people died in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, early 60s. I would say there's something unhealthy about war. And these were not people who came back physically shot up and injured, but there was something about this. I do want to make that point, but back to KPFA, when people ask me about, my point, I bring out this military stuff, this GI stuff. I was a veteran. I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. And by the way, let me toss out one other thing too. About the Kennedy assassination. The alleged shooter, this Oswald, he was in approximately the same time I was in the Marine Corps. So he trained on the same rifle range, or the same type of rifle range, that standard, that I was on. Same weaponry, same of all of that. So I know pretty much exactly what a Marine Corps trained rifleman can do and cannot do. And I'll tell you, that shooting that's attributed to Oswald, not possible. Not possible.
Just before we get to back to Pacifica, so are you a believer that JFK was murdered by the national security state, or?
Yes.
But that Oswald himself was certainly not a lone shooter.
Definitely not. I think one of the of recent books, one that came out 3, 4, 5 years ago, I think it was what's his name? I think it was James Douglas, The Unspeakable. I can't remember off the top of my head. Maybe can you give me a second? I'd look around. Maybe I have the book. I should have it here. Where did I put it? Hopefully. Excuse me. I'm not.
Well, it's okay, Daniel. We'll definitely in the future, because I'm very interested. Definitely in the future, we'll revisit that topic. But let's get back to
these are tangents. But by the way,
because now during because during this period where Pacifica was becoming more and more of a popular radio station to listen to, especially in the very robust anti-war movements and people power movements in California and New York. Talk to us about a very popular Pacifica program, which went even beyond people who listen to Pacifica, and that is Democracy Now. And talk about how Democracy Now has, like the rest of the Pacifica family, jumped the shark on a lot of critical issues related to imperialism and, of course, the anti-Russia conspiracy theories.
Well, in short, Democracy Now has moved to the right. It has moved into the comfort zone of the corporate, the corporate media, the neoliberal state, neoliberal establishment on many things. Not totally. I could give a few exceptions where I think they've done pretty well. That's covering the Tara Reid thing.
Mm-hmm.
They've covered.
This is the woman who's accused Joe Biden of sexually assaulting her.
Yes, I like their coverage on her, and there's they give good coverage on a number of things, but in general, much of their stuff, Democracy Now stuff, comes from corporate media, comes from the New York Times and the Washington Post. Often you'll turn it on and they'll say, well, we're going to talk about the such and such and such and such, and now here we'll introduce someone who's a journalist at the New York Times or the Washington Post, mostly the New York Times. Now, that coverage on these various things, it might sometimes even be good coverage, but the problem. Can you hear that sound? That ting?
Yeah, it's okay. Not distracting at all. It's all right.
Okay, because it's somebody left their phone on or alarm on. I can run off and turn off. Okay. The problem is that it ignores so many good journalists. So many it does not promote journalists outside that are independent. It gives credibility to the New York Times and the Washington Post. Now, what's wrong with that? They promote, they have good articles, but they also promote fake news. They are fake news. I mean, I realize that's
and specifically specifically Democracy Now has been amplifying, as you mentioned, these notorious corporate media partners in crime to the CIA, to the State Department, on Libya, Syria, yes, and on Libya, Syria, Ukraine, and Russia Gate, or as I prefer to call it, Russia Hate. Talk to us about that.
And Syria.
Yeah, and now talk to us about that.
Yeah, and okay, they just asked me. I didn't hear why I was talking. Did you say talk to you about that?
Yes.
I'd love to. Okay, about 2-3 years ago, they started out with this anti-Russian campaign, and part of it was the Russians in Syria and all that. And Democracy Now was pushing that, going along with that, regurgitating that. And they still are, by the way. But anyway, we wrote, and my big fear, I sat there wondering, my gosh, they're going to get into a confrontation with nuclear-armed Russia? And they seem totally unaware of this. They seem to have forgotten that both sides have nuclear weapons, that U.S. could flat out win a war and still destroy the world, including ourselves. But anyway, so I was kind of pretty scared. And then we, our veterans group, the Veterans for Peace, we wrote a letter to Amy Goodman. We sent it to her, we mailed it to her, we emailed it to her. It was also on many websites. And when she came to Berkeley, we went out and leafleted. And we got a great response from the people who were attending this talk. You'd assume that they were Amy Goodman fans. In a way, I was a Amy Goodman fan too.
So as I. I spent a lot of time in 2015 and 2016 watching Democracy Now, if not every other day, certainly every day, to keep myself informed of what was really going on in the world.
Yeah, and these people are fans. Well, we passed out our leaflets. We passed out 300 of our leaflets, copies of that letter, and we got a great response from people. Of course, a lot of them knew that we'd be leafleting because one of our friends, Ann Garrison, had on the Saturday Night News had announced that we'd be leafleting.
Yes, and and Garrison, in case people don't know, she's a wonderful independent journalist who hosts a local Pacifica outlet, and she's a contributor to Black Agenda Reports.
Yeah, she's great on Black Agenda Report. And by the way, here's another thing. She asked KPFA, the news director, if she can have a what do you call them, a press pass. They would not give it to her. Now she has
because how come?
Because she's Ann Garrison. Because she doesn't go along with the party line, with this watered down progressive, pseudo progressive nonsense. Because she has exposed a lot of what happens in Zaire and also especially Rwanda.
Yeah.
She's done a lot of research on Rwanda and has. Excuse me, can I run over and turn off that awful thing, or run it in and drop it in the sink?
Sure. Go ahead.
I'll be gone about 15 seconds.
Sure. Go right ahead. While Daniel sorts something out, I just want to remind people to share widely 1+1 with your friends, your families, and even people who may disagree with a lot of the content. And make sure to share widely on Facebook and Twitter. And Daniel has just rejoined us. And so Daniel, tell us about Democracy Now. How have they been presenting? They presented the Libya war as if there were secular, moderate rebels fighting against Gaddafi, when there were no secular, moderate rebels fighting against Gaddafi. They were Gulf armed radical Muslims. And many people were a bit surprised at Democracy Now whitewashing these Islamist rebels. Mm-hmm. But everyone has been more shocked by Democracy Now's coverage of Syria, which, as you mentioned, Democracy Now has sort of been amplifying that there should be a confrontation with Russia. So talk to us about how Democracy Now has been presenting the war in Syria.
Well, excuse me. At the time, and ever since, they were holding up these white helmets as this saintly group, the White Helmets, who've been exposed as actually being
an Islamist front group.
Yeah. That's what we have all independent journalists have confirmed that, but they go along with that. They hold them up. The story about Bashar
Bashar al-Assad.
But he's dropping what do you call it, chemical weapons, these various gas bombs, chemical weapons against his own people. She reports that. Now, what we asked in this letter was that you go ask people like Cy Hirsch, the Seymour Hirsch. There's a whole bunch of others. There's another one I like. I like George McGovern, and I can't that name veteran intelligence persons for.
Yeah, actually, I think it's Ralph McGovern, right?
Oh no, not Ralph. I said Ray McGovern. Ray.
Yeah. Ray McGovern.
I hope you can edit this and edit out my mistake. It's Ray McGovern. I really like his articles, and he and that group that he's part of, Intelligence Veterans, they come out with. I mean, people should. I mean, Democracy Now! Flat out ignores them. Now, Democracy Now! Used to have others on. There's another person I would about Syria. There is a guy named Stephen Cohen, a professor. He writes for The Nation. And
yes, and he often debunks a lot of the anti-Russia Putin derangement syndrome.
Yeah,
and advocates for a détente with Russia.
Yes, and and he's been here in the Bay Area, gave a talk, but I read his book, and I would say he's not a radical. He's not very far left. He's what I would call a sensible liberal, one of the nearly extinct species. Mm-hmm. But she used to have him on. She doesn't have him on anymore, and he doesn't. He doesn't give that.
And she doesn't have, and Democracy Now! Doesn't invite him on because because of the fact that he advocates détente with Russia and debunks a lot of the propaganda against Russia, which is tied into Syria, right?
That's my view of it, my opinion. I mean, I haven't heard Amy say that, but that is my opinion. She will not have anyone else on who actually gives a different view of it. She gives the State Department the neocon side of the Syria thing. That is what she does. And again, as I said before, when she gives very good coverage of various other topics, she will often have people from the New York Times and the Washington Post, which gives credibility. It does two things. It gives credibility to the Times and the Post, the corporate media, and it also fails to give exposure to independent journalists. Just ignores
who have been exposing that the Syria war it's Libya, Afghanistan, and Iraq all over again. It's another imperial project.
Exactly. So she is not giving these other sources. I have traveled in the Middle East. I'm not an expert on that area, but what I would say is go to the various independent journalists, look at some of them, and listen to what they're saying. You know, like Ray McGovern, and people like him. Well, there's a whole pile of them.
Rick Sterling, who I've interviewed in the past. Max Blumenthal, Rania Kalik, Vanessa Beeley, Eva Bartlett.
Right. All of those.
Rania Masri, who Amy Goodman had on the show, I think only once or twice to present the truthful anti-war position on Syria, but she's not had her on for as long as I can remember.
Amy Goodman has been going farther and farther to the right, and I'll take.
Why do you think that is? And why do you think Democracy Now has, in my opinion, jumped the shark on Syria, Ukraine, anti-Russia, scapegoating?
Well, I can give you two reasons that I think. One is that she is her show gets played on a lot of NPR station, NPR, PBS.
Okay.
Now they are. excuse me.
They tend to follow the State Department line.
They do, and if you want to get your show on their network, you better go along with the State Department line, at least to a great degree. Let me just go off on a tangent and give an example of what the NPR does. A friend of mine and a fellow board member at KPFA. His name is James McFadden. He's a board member of Rescue Pacifica.
Yeah.
He listens sometimes to NPR, and one day he was listening, and they were saying, they list all the good people that sponsor the show, that send money, and one of them was the CIA. Yes, CIA.
The actual CIA, or just a front group of the CIA, like the National Endowment.
The real CIA. They said the CIA, the one that kills people, the one that murdered Kennedy, the one that. But anyway, they openly announced that, and he thought, "Wait a minute, that must be either it was a slip of the tongue. I didn't hear it right. Can't believe that." So he went and contacted them and said, "Well, what is this? Did I hear this right?" And they confirmed that, yes, the CIA sponsored that program, exactly as they said. So it's confirmed that they did that the CIA, and then they, of course, assured my friend, they assured him that, but this does not affect our programming. No, it doesn't. It does not affect what we say.
But the CIA itself, but the CIA itself doesn't fund Pacifica programs like Democracy Now.
No. Well, wait. I do not know who funds Pacifica. I mean, that's another thing. Where do they get their money? Now, they claim to get their money from the listeners, that they're listener supported.
Okay.
But I've also seen accounts, and I have not fully verified this myself. I'm repeating what I've heard, that they get their money from various foundations.
That wouldn't surprise me.
And getting
Democracy Now certainly gets lots of foundation sponsors.
Right. Now, KPFA and Pacifica do not accept foundation money at this point.
Or so they claim.
There could be some coming in the back door. I think we suspect that some of the announcers, some of the programmers are getting grants from various foundations. We suspect that. It's hard to prove or disprove. It certainly seems reasonable. It's unreasonably reasonable. And as far as Amy Goodman goes, I think that one thing is she wants to have her show on all these things. I suspect that she gets money from these sources. How could she, to run it, that operation that she runs, she needs that needs money. Now, at the same time, she runs quite a few very excellent programs, like the Tara Reid, her coverage of Tara Reid, which I thought was very good.
Her coverage of Standing Rock as well was also, yeah.
Yeah, she's done a number. She does some very good stuff still, and what I suspect, and again, this is without proof, no evidence, just my suspicion. She seems to have made a deal with the devil, saying, "Okay, I'll support the State Department line on Syria, on this, and this, and you let me tell the truth about that, and that." That's the kind of the impression I get. I mean, and I cannot, and again, my suspicion.
Well, I can. I can honestly say this. Do you think because I've noticed some of the guests Amy Goodman has on to make the case that Assad must go. Some of her guests have been members or the founders of Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, Amnesty International, and journalists from The Intercept. And The Intercept, that's the media project of Glenn Greenwald, Jeremy Scahill, Nora Poitras. And like Pacifica, like Democracy Now!, sometimes they do some very good work. Their coverage of Brazil has been good. But on Syria, sometimes the anti-Russia conspiracy theories and a little bit of warmongering with Iran, The Intercept has been terrible. And I've noticed that Amy Goodman, when talking about Syria, often has these people on as guests to make the case, even though Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International has a bit of a troublesome history when it comes to, jumping the shark, as I say, like when it came to the Gulf War, Libya, Ukraine, and right now, Syria as well, and Venezuela.
Yes, I believe several of those human rights organizations, alleged human rights organizations, now they will go out and sometimes do good work on some issues. At the same time, I believe I've heard and I've read, and again, I can't really quote my sources on this. I can't regurgitate them off the top of my head, but they are getting foundation money. And this is
totally... and who are some of these foundations? Can you name some of these foundations?
There's a lot of them. Well, like there's the ones that come to mind are the Ford, the Pew Foundation.
Okay, perfect.
Now I can't. I mean, those are the foundations that are kind of set at the top of my mind. Well, what I do see is that I see this right-wing trend, and this seems to be what's happening. I have seen, I followed, the way cover-ups that have happened all through my life. I mean, the Operation Mockingbird from back in 1947, and then they got exposed in the mid 1970s. And then, of course, we don't do that anymore. And of course, they do. There's so much. I think one. How can I say? They. Well, I think that. I think that some call it the deep state. Well, the corporate state and their bureaucrats, their flunkies,
are starting to infiltrate outlets like Pacifica.
I think they did start a long time ago. This has been going on for over 30 years.
And you think Democracy Now! Is the latest victim of that?
Yes.
As well, I have to say, while we're being very timely about this, I know Truth Dig, a fantastic news outlet founded by Robert Scheer, who was a Ramparts veteran and was fired from the LA Times for speaking out against the Iraq War, and he founded this outlet, Truth Dig, which gives a platform to Chris Hedges and other brilliant writers, and he has his own show on one of the Californian Pacifica outlets, and he's been one of the few voices of reasons to speak out against this anti-Russia hysteria. Much to, but of course he's now very much marginalized on the on the so-called left, who has jumped the shark very much on anti-Russia scapegoating because they all suffer from Trump derangement syndrome.
Yes, and when I mention any of this, it's called conspiracy theories. Well, let's face it, Russiagate is a conspiracy theory on steroids.
Exactly. And it's a bunch of rival oligarchs and rival warmongers who don't like the fact that this particular crazy guy was the one that got elected, was the one who managed to get into power, and because of that and this dangerous ideology called lesser evilism, they're now doing everything in their power to thwart Trump, just because they can't stand the fact that Hillary Clinton lost, even though Clinton is the reason why we have Trump, since she told her friends in the media to prop the guy up, as WikiLeaks has revealed.
Yeah, she was she was a very bad candidate. And actually, go back to 2016, Trump actually, he's transparent. You see all the bad stuff he's doing. I don't really see him as being much different from the others. He's kind of crazy. I mean, now he comes out really wacky during this COVID-19 stuff. I think he's kind of lost his marbles, but if he ever had any. But these others are no better. Now, Biden, if this Tara Reade stuff is true, and it does sound true, that he's the lesser rapist. You say, we used to be the lesser evil. Now it looks to me like it's going to be, we vote for the lesser rapist.
And he's also a notorious warmonger. He's very much a neo-Keynesian figure, and not only that, he's a war profiteer. And Trump, when he was telling the democratically elected president of Ukraine, Zelensky, who would like détente with Russia and would like peace between the Ukrainians whose first language is Ukrainian and the Russian Ukrainians to make peace, when Trump was saying to them, hey, you should look into Joe Biden because he made a profit out of overthrowing your previous government. And the establishment and Pacifica all seems to want to impeach Trump for telling Zelensky that Joe Biden is a war profiteer.
Yeah. It was Hunter Biden, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. But Joe Biden also made a good profit out of.
Right. Joe Biden. And one thing about him, a lot of people are saying that he's on the edge of senility, but which may or may not be true. But when I heard him, he may be senile, but when I heard him talking, in that debate with Bernie, I was very impressed how effectively he could lie his way out of stuff. He supported actually not supported the war in Iraq. He helped promote the war in Iraq.
Exactly.
And here he is, and he lied his way out of it. I said, man, that guy's not senile. He's really a smooth liar. So
he was the vice president under Obama, who was a smooth operator, a smooth liar, and of course was part of the terrible Clinton revolution, and we all know that Bill Clinton was also a liar and a warmonger and very much a violent neo-Keynesian figure as well.
Yeah, he was. Clinton was just a lot of bad things, just a lot of bad news. Both of the Clintons. So when it came to 2016, I think I've talked a lot of people I know. To them, Trump actually looked better than Hillary Clinton. Now, Hillary Clinton, from what she was saying, it looked to me like she might have gotten us into a war with Russia. I mean, nuclear armed Russia, a war with them.
And we do have to sure. And I actually just want to remind people that the Assad government, you may not like them, but they are the sovereign government of Syria, which is under attack by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the Americans, the Canadians, the French, the British, who all want to balkanize Syria, tear that country apart, because it is part of that project of a new American century that the neocons had. It is part of this new stage in colonialism that the West wants to have, and just like Yemen is the victim of a Western Gulf-backed terror, Syria is the victim of a Western Gulf-backed terror. The only difference is the Yemenis are poor and defenseless, but the Syrians are strong enough to defend themselves. And luckily, they asked the Russians if they could legally come into their country to defend them against one of the great evils, which is aggressive war.
Exactly. And another thing, let me just say another thing. We Americans get nothing out of this war. It's not to our advantage. Our money goes into that. Now, I'm living on Social Security and all that. The people I know living on, many people, I think we get an average of, I get about $1,000 a month. A lot of people get like $1,300 a month or $1,500 a month. And this is in a world where it's very hard to find a place to live for that kind of money. Many apartments will rent for like $3,000 a month. So all of this money is being wasted. It could be spent on education. Another thing, let me point out another project that needs to be done. Nobody seems interested in it, but I mean, nobody was in power. But we need our whole transportation system revamped. We need, our rail lines, which are torn up bit by bit. They've been torn up ever since the early 1950s.
Yeah.
And they are I would say that they are basically an ecologically sound. They are the best way to travel. Also kind of fun way to travel. You get a good view of the countryside, and they're generally safe if they maintain the rail lines, which they don't always do. That makes them kind of dangerous, but it's not like an automobile where you get out and you're in danger all the time. That's this transportation. Well, you talk about that. They don't have money for it because they're building nuclear bombs. They're building aircraft carriers. What about healthcare? We can't afford that. We gotta build more F-35 fighter planes, which, and I'm not an expert on the F-35, but from reports I've heard, It's almost as good as the old aircraft to replace us. Not quite as good,
Mm-hmm.
and it's incredibly expensive. Um, it this military spending is just an awful thing. It's an awful wasteful thing, and we as Americans are getting nothing out of this. And people often, I mean, the establishment is promoting this thing. Say thank you to veterans, thank you for your service. We didn't serve freedom. We thought we were, but that's not true. We're not serving freedom. And just one of the many big lies. Not the biggest lie. It's just one of the many, many, many big lies. Um,
Yeah, and I also have to add that if you that if you want to actually live on the planet, if you want to fight climate change and have a sustainable economy, war is war wars for oil, wars for mining, and the creation of these tools of death are are the biggest threats to survival of the human species.
yes,
The pollutants that goes into making those fighter jets, which need a hell of a lot of fossil fuels, is an enemy, and therefore it is very irresponsible and very dangerous for supposedly left-wing outlets, call it progressive, call it socialist outlets, call it green, call it green outlets, to be propping up, wars like the war in Libya, Syria, Ukraine, or even throwing the Venezuelans and the Bolivian democratically socialist governments under the bus in the names of wars for oil and mining, or the fraud, as you mentioned earlier in the interview, of humanitarian intervention.
exactly, exactly.
So
And it's just, yeah.
Go on.
Well, it's we, the American people, get nothing out of it. It destroys our planet. It destroys our country. It destroys our democracy. And you can criticize our Constitution. There's many flaws in it through the American history, but it has had a lot of good things about it. And this era that we're living in, they're just out to end American democracy. It's, I mean, it's just, they're just not words.
I know. I think what you're trying to say is that the weapons of mass deception that make
Yes.
us that make us support war in Syria is also a war on us, because not only are we destroying lives over there in the name of a sociopathic system, the profit system, but it weakens social justice at home.
Exactly.
So where does where does your campaign to save Pacifica? Where does the campaign to save Pacifica and to put Democracy Now into account? Where does that go? And is it being successful in any way?
Our recent referendum was an astounding success for us. That was the results came in March. The voting took place over about several weeks, a month or so, and it was a landslide. These people wanted to really do the coup d'état to Pacifica.
Mm-hmm.
They failed. Now, at the same time, I want to say that we don't think the bylaws are perfect the way they are. They can use some change. I do. Many of us who oppose this campaign do think the bylaws require some change. But they got to be done democratically. It can't be just somebody in the back room, non-smoke filled, even if it's no non-smoke filled back room. And that's what that election, that referendum was put together by about 9 people, and then just foisted on us using a court. Excuse me, somebody is at the door here, and I gotta let them in.
Sure, no problem.
Hold on about 10 seconds.
All right. While Daniel's doing that, again, I just want to remind people that to share widely 1+1. Make sure to try to get people to subscribe. And in the future, we are going to be, I am going to be developing both the Facebook page and the websites where people can work to donate. We have Daniel back. Daniel.
Okay.
Explain how your campaign was going.
Okay, you asked me where it's going.
Yeah.
We are fighting to survive. There's a huge debt. The network is in debt, and this has been another method of bringing it down. I think that a lot of this debt has been our funds have been squandered, but we are trying to keep it as a democratic system and progressive, anti-war, outside, not aligned with the Democratic Party, not aligned with lesser evils, lesser rapists, whatever.
And try to give more voices to also alternative left candidates like members of the Socialist Equality Party.
Exactly.
Peace and Freedom Party and the Green Party.
Exactly. And now I gotta say that this does not look. The outlook is not optimistic. Actually, 2 years ago, it was very bad. That's where we hit rock bottom, and we did get, but we have made a comeback, and then we're practically out of the picture. Now we're at least in the picture.
Except for the finances.
Yeah. Virginia said that, except for the finances. And the finances are bad. And we have to work that out. Now, okay, here's one thing. A lot of people have said, hey, they've looked at some of the stuff on KPFA, which is bad stuff. On the other hand, a lot of good programs have been kicked off the air. Most recently, Labor Week News, it's run by Steven Zeltzer. Other programs have been kicked off, just kicked off. Now, and people will say, I'm not going to have anything to do with KPFA anymore. I'm not going to contribute. No. I say, no, please stay on, stay in there, keep up your membership. You keep up your membership, $25 a year, you have a voice. You have that gives you standing to get up there, and you can vote. And our system of voting is a lot better than the federal one or the state one or by the U.S. I mean, we do win Canada. We do win seats. I ran for a seat, and I won it on the basis of being an anti-war ex-Marine, restoring KPFA's anti-war voice. We are asking, one big thing is we're asking people to stay on as members of this and stay with us, stay in the fight. And this goes for KPFA. It's the same at the other 4 stations. The 5
WBAI,
yeah. Please stay in there and keep on the fight.
So you're optimistic that that it is worth saving Pacifica.
Yes, definitely. I believe it's worth saving. I believe it's definitely worth saving, and I think it is possible. I think we can do it.
And last question I want to ask you.
Excuse me.
Yeah. The last question I wanted to ask you is has Amy Goodman or any of the producers at Democracy Now, or any interns, or any interns, anyone who's worked there, have any of them ever responded to your letters, your concerns about their coverage on Syria, and listen to at least the suggestions of the guests that debunk the propaganda on Syria that they themselves have been propping up?
Well, since we leafleted them very effectively in Berkeley, she has never been back in Berkeley again. That's kind of a response. That's kind of a statement.
Wow.
Other than that, there have been no response. And as I say, this letter from our group got around. It was on many websites. It was even out there in Spanish. And we leafleted here. There was a person who leafleted with the same letter in somewhere in Canada. I forget if it's Montreal or Ontario. Mm-hmm. So she has seen this letter. She has seen it. It must haunt her like a ghost. But she has not responded in any way other than to not come back to Berkeley. She continues to do the things which we asked her not to do. She has continued. We asked her to look up other sources on the white helmets, consider these other journalists. She does not do it. To the contrary, she continues with these bogus sources.
Yeah.
So the answer is no. She is. The only response is that she has not come back. She has never again set foot in Berkeley.
That's pretty sobering, considering the fact that Amy Goodman survived Western-backed imperial slaughter in East Timor.
Yeah, she survived them and got out, and then she survived our leafleting here and elsewhere and got out.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it's just unbelievable. And then my last question, Daniel, is which outlets would you recommend, or which specific muckrakers and mythbusters would you recommend when it comes to a lot of the a lot of the hot topics of the day, like debunking the anti-Russia conspiracy theories, Syria, Venezuela, and so forth? Are there any particular outlets that you would recommend to people while people have to take an extended time out from Democracy Now! And Pacifica until a revolution happens there?
Yes. In the first place, we do, despite all the bad stuff that does get on KPFA, we do have some excellent shows. As we mentioned, Dennis Bernstein. There is Project Censored. Mm-hmm. And there are others. There's now the websites. There are several websites that I go to routinely, mm-hmm. and there's several that are good that I don't have. There's a limit. I can only go to a limited number. Consortium.
I understand. I also have that same problem sometimes. There's only 24 hours in the day.
Yes. So I highly recommend Consortium News. And of course there's what was it? Descent. The one And there's some that that have posted my articles. There's also
that would be Dissident Voice and Counterpunch.
Yes. Yeah, Dissident Voice is one. I like that. And let's see. There's Global Research, Canadian.
Yep. Global Research. I have to agree with you on that. Yeah.
One I like. I'm on is Caitlin Johnstone. I like her pieces.
Okay.
And
also gets her work published at Consortium News.
Right. And I'm on her email list. So I read about maybe a third or a fourth of her articles. I like them. And here's one that'll maybe kind of surprise you. There's antiwar.com, which is run by
libertarians who are fiscally conservative, socially liberal, but oftentimes tend to be very anti-imperialist, like Scott Horton, Angela Keaton, Dr. Ron Paul, and Daniel McAdams.
Yeah, they're rock solid anti-war, and often they come out with more reliable stuff than progressives do. So I keep them on my. I go to that site every day. One that I like is one commentator, Andrew Basovich, retired military person. I don't agree with everything he says. He identifies himself as being a conservative, and there's some points that I would not go along with him. I think he rejects what he would call. I think he would reject anything he calls a conspiracy theory, whereas, well, I think that's a weird category. But I do like his stuff. BAR.
Black Agenda Reports.
That is good. I recommend that, and of course, Ann Garrison, she is there, and at KPFA she does have, she has that very small, about 3 or 4 minutes a week news thing that she gets.
Only 3 or 4 minutes.
That's all she gets.
That is not only a crime against truth telling and a violation of First Amendment rights, but that is also a crime against humanity, as Ann Garrison does extraordinary work, especially on Rwanda and Congo.
Yes, her Rwandan work has been very, very eye-opening, and she got a prize, a journalism prize in Belgium, in where you're living, somewhere in Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's this prize-winning journalist who cannot get a press pass from KPFA.
Shocking.
And I'm surprised, actually. We sometimes we sit there and speculate: are they ever going to get around to kicking her off the air? Because she's written some articles about KPFA which are not flattering, insightful, about the very stuff we're talking about, the news coverage. And where does she stand on their bad list? Well, now. And so I guess to sum it up, we are hoping that we'll be able to rescue the whole network, rescue KPFA. We want to go back to this traditional anti-war voice, this anti-McCarthy, anti-Neil McCarthy stuff. We don't want any of this Russia Gate stuff. We would love to not be burned to cinders in a nuclear war. We'd love that. And a good many we want health care, universal health, end to military spending. And as I say, I'm not a pacifist, but I mean, these that the U.S. has been fighting are just awful. I mean, they're for every bad reason. And by the way, even though I would support the war against Hitler, I have some, someday we'll get together and talk about this. I have some serious criticisms of the way that was fought. Which militarily and morally and everything else, I do not like them. I think it was pretty disgusting, some of the stuff that was done.
Well, Daniel, we're going to have to save that for another for another interview in the future. But I also just want to close by saying another great outlet when it comes to a lot of the imperial hotspots of the day, whether it's Syria, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and other hot topic issues is Min Press News. I highly recommend people check out the Gray Zone, led by led by Max Blumenthal, and of course Min Press News, led by Manar Muhawish, also has published the work of Vanessa Beeley, Eva Bartlett, and of course the brilliant and very underrated muckraker Whitney Webb, and Rick Sterling as well, who oftentimes when I'm trying to find interviews with him is mostly on a libertarian's show, Scott Horton.
Yes, several. I know him personally, Rick Sterling, and these people, their articles. Where can you publish that stuff? Often on antiwar.com, a libertarian site. Just out of honesty, I have to recommend them, saying, of course, that I'm a socialist. But, if we blow ourselves away and burn ourselves to cinders in a nuclear war, I don't think we'll be discussing anything
exactly
to do with socialism or anything else.
Exactly. And hey, anyone who wants to march to stop a war, which is based on environmental destruction, greed, and for a tiny elites, anyone who's opposed to imperialism, I'll gladly march with them.
Yes.
Well, Daniel, thank you very much for your time. I wish you the best of luck in fighting for the heart and soul of a left-wing outlet, which is supposed to be for social justice at home, but for anti-imperialism abroad, and not being selectively anti-war. So I wish you the best of luck in your campaign to save Pacifica and to hold democracy now into account. And I really hope that we get the chance to talk again in the future.
Yes. By the way, one thing I want to point out, Democracy Now! Is actually, it says it's from Pacifica, but it's actually independent of Pacifica.
Ah, okay. Pacifica just broadcasts them.
Yes. It is independent. Well, so we in Pacifica, we don't really have any say about what happens there. We can, try to fight what the KPFA does, the programming, but Democracy Now! Is kind of beyond our control.
Well, hopefully people who are still foolish enough to watch Democracy Now!, hopefully they can do some kind of a campaign to say to Democracy Now!, stop jumping the shark and start telling the truth when it comes to Syria, Nicaragua, anti-Rush conspiracy theories, and so forth and so forth.
Okay, well, Youri, thank you very much for having me on your show.
It was a real honor to have you on, and I hope that this will be the first of many conversations. And I hope that you get well soon, and that cough goes away.
Yes. Well, I've had that cough for a long time. It's not COVID-19. It's just me. Anytime I talk for a long time, I start, I have this weak throat.
No problem. That's my fault, by the way. I tend to do that with the guests. But anywho, I look forward to getting in touch in the future, and thank you so much for your generous time. Really appreciate it, and best of luck fighting the good fights.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your work. Thank you for your.
Thank you.